James Hyman, and this is James Hyman Gallery. Delighted to be staging this exhibition of Raymond Cauchetier, the greatest of the New Wave photographers. It was Cauchetier who had access to the sets of Truffaut, Godard, all the great French New Wave film directors, and he really, more than any other photographer, encapsulated that moment. His are the most famous pictures of that generation of filmmakers. His photographs are incredibly famous. They're many of the really seminal, most celebrated pictures of French New Wave cinema. But he himself is too little known, so everyone will recognize these images. And in fact, we're staging the very first major exhibition of his work, celebrating Raymond Cauchetier as a photographer, and really trying to say, look, this is a really remarkable photographer who, although his images are known, he is too little known. Well, the exhibition really focuses on Raymond Cauchetier's work as a photographer in France, documenting this great moment in French cinema with Godard and Truffaut. But he was actually a much more wide-ranging photographer.
He learned photography in a rather random way through his military years, tried his hand at documenting things that interested him, but wasn't inhibited in any way by a program of rules about how to make a good picture.
Once he'd returned to France after his service, he began taking photographs there, and soon that led to his engagement with the New Wave French cinema. And what's, I think, very exciting is that this was somebody who wasn't an outsider. He knew the directors, the producers, the cameramen. He was very much part of it, and I think you can see that relaxation and spontaneity in the photographs themselves.
There's a freshness, there's a vitality, there's an ease around the picture making which comes through loud and clear. There is a kind of, dare I say, breathless energy about them, which remains as vital today as it was then.
Well, when the French New Wave cinema began around 1959-60, it was low-budget filmmaking, it was young directors, it was often unknown cast members.
A bunch of critics from Cahiers du Cinéma had decided that it was time for them to get behind the camera and start making films themselves. And in one way, François Truffaut started the ball rolling in the early 50s, where he started to say, very forcefully and in a very militant way, that French cinema was dead, it was becoming academic, and it was time for people who had a real vision of cinema, who were filmmakers who wrote and had a visual sense and a total sense of cinema to actually make the films. And by that, of course, he meant himself and his colleagues, Jean-Luc Godard, Claude Chabrol, Jacques Rivette, and they were the filmmakers, with Éric Rohmer as well, who became the Nouvelle Vague.
What you have here is a sense of both director and the photographer all setting out to break the conventions, to break the rules.
The famous thing about the Nouvelle Vague ethic was, let's go out into the streets and make a film. And if there happen to be people around, if they happen to get in the way of the camera, if they happen to look at the camera, well, that might break down the realist illusion. And Cauchetier was clearly capturing that sense of improvisation and impromptu. And you know, even the more formal of these images, they capture that very beautifully.
It was a lot of people at the beginning of their career. Cauchetier found himself in a very interesting position where he knew many of those people at the moment just before their careers took off. So really he was a contemporary of theirs, a friend of theirs, a trusted confidant, and so had this incredible access to people who later would become these enormous stars.
Raymond Cauchetier's work that's hanging on the wall here reminds us of a number of things. First, I think that the photographers who recorded the making of movies are often unsung heroes. What we find in these pictures, which I find so fascinating, is a sensibility which is so very much in tune with that of Jean-Luc Godard, Truffaut, of the Nouvelle Vague directors.
It's really interesting that Godard and Truffaut in particular appear in these pictures. They were perhaps the most publicity conscious of the New Wave directors. And Godard has this style in some of these images. He almost appears as if he's a spy on the set of his own films. He just seems to have walked in. He seems like a kind of secret observer from some mysterious government. It's almost as if he's infiltrated his own set as a critic.
The exhibition gives an idea of the range of French New Wave cinema and also the different kinds of stars that there were at that time.
The Lola shots, the Jacques Demy images, are really extraordinary because there is a sort of romantic eroticism which is much more kind of lush and manic in a way than the kind of Parisian cool that you associate with Breathless. On one hand you've got this eroticism, but at the same time there's almost this sort of worshipping sense of fan worship, and I think there's something of that in a lot of these shots too. Breathless was Godard's first feature, Lola was Jacques Demy's first feature, so no one, including I think the directors themselves, knew what the film would really look like. They didn't know what the style of the film would be like, and somehow Cauchetier seems to have been able to capture the atmosphere on set and actually very closely capture the spirit of the film.
If I had to identify a couple of favourite pictures, I think one inevitably would be that splendid and joyous picture of Belmondo and Seberg walking down the Champs-Élysées. It's a picture I've known for decades. At last I've found out who took it.
And for years I think that's been assumed to be a film still. That, it's the poster image, it's the most famous image from À bout de souffle. What was interesting is finding out that that isn't a film still. That was actually between filming when Belmondo and Seberg were genuinely walking along the Champs-Élysées. And I think what's interesting about these pictures is often what you have is this blurring between reality and fiction. The New Wave photographers, the New Wave films were often made on the streets of France. And so there is genuinely a blurring between what is people playing a part, what is a film set, and what is the reality of two people walking along the Champs-Élysées between takes. The exhibition is coinciding with the 50th anniversary of À bout de souffle, so there's obviously a tie-in there with Godard and that great film. But we were keen to show the range of Cauchetier's work in that period, but also the range of French cinema.
Cauchetier is 90 years old, I believe now. His photographs are being exhibited for the first time. His talent, his vision has always been subjugated to that of the directors for whom he was working. But I think what is so satisfying is to see that there is an artist at work here. There is an eye, there is a sensibility, and there is a photographer working at that point where certain documentary photographic traditions meet this revolutionary new chapter in the history of film.
I think one of the important points to make, though, about Raymond Cauchetier's work is his most famous pictures are undoubtedly these works of the French New Wave, of Truffaut and Godard and so many of those famous film directors. But he's always been at pains to stress that actually this was a particular moment in his career, and that before that, there were books published of his work in Cambodia, for example. More recently, he's been working on a very big project about sculpture. So I think it's true of many artists and photographers. They get famous for a particular body of work, but they're always at pains to stress that this was one moment, that the career continues. And it's very exciting that you have somebody who is now 90 with a very long career, with a lot of exciting moments within that career.